The amber glow of the street lamp outside my window painted the rim of an empty glass on the sill, a small, sad halo against the indifferent urban night. I watched it, and the dust motes dancing in its light, for what felt like an eternity. Time, once a relentless current, had become a stagnant pool, thick with the silt of old failures. My old life, a sharp-edged thing of purpose and pursuit, was a discarded skin. Now I merely existed, a ghost in my own apartment, the city's distant hum my only companion. A shrill, insistent vibration tore through the quiet, rattling the cheap veneer of my coffee table. My old burner phone, a relic I kept more out of habit than expectation, glowed with an unfamiliar number. I stared at it, a tremor of unease rippling through the dull apathy I'd cultivated. It rang again, a stark, demanding sound in the silence. Some part of me, the part I thought I'd buried deep, stirred. "Cole," I answered, my voice a gravelly whisper unused to forming words. A voice, raspy and urgent, filled my ear. "They found it, just like the others, the signature. It's back." My breath hitched. The air in my small room seemed to thicken, suddenly too heavy to draw. The others, the phantom limb of a past agony throbbed. "Where?" I demanded, the word a raw rasp. "Yacht Marina, midnight, slip 73, but..." The message they left, it pointed to the wrong slip number. 73. But the real target was slip 74. It's a trick, a calling card. The voice paused, a ragged intake of breath. "I need to see this, Cole, slip 73, but the real target was 74. A deliberate misdirection, a taunt. He always played games, he always had." My knuckles were white where I gripped the phone, the plastic digging into my palm. It was familiar. It was real. The city outside was a blurred smear of neon and rain-slicked asphalt as I drove, the old sedan groaning in protest. The precision, the audacity, the way he always left a small, twisted piece of himself behind. The air grew heavy with the scent of salt and diesel as I approached the docks. The yacht Marina after midnight wrong slip number sign loomed, a skeletal finger against the bruised sky. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the sleek, silent hulks of pleasure crafts bobbing gently in their berths. The rain had started, a fine, persistent drizzle that blurred the edges of the world. A lone patrol car, its blue lights swirling mutely, marked the scene. A uniformed officer, young and pale beneath the brim of his cap, stood beside it, his gaze fixed on a distant vessel. I killed my engine and stepped out, the damp air instantly seeping into my clothes. "Who are I?" the young officer asked, his voice cracking slightly as I approached. "Cole, I got a call." He squinted, then his eyes widened in recognition. "Cole, the former detective." His tone was a mix of awe and trepidation. My reputation, or what was left of it, preceded me. I nodded, ignoring the unspoken judgment. "What happened?" He gestured vaguely towards the end of the pier. "A break-in on the Serafina, slip 74, but the alarm was tripped on 73 a few minutes before. It was a diversion. By the time we got there, they were long gone from the real target." A diversion. My heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was too precise, too deliberate. "Anything taken?" I asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be simple. "Only one thing, a small, ornate box. The owner, a collector, he's beside himself. Says it's a family heirloom, invaluable. The security system." It was state-of-the-art, no forced entry, just bypassed, clean as a whistle. I walked past him, my boots echoing on the wet planks of the pier. As I drew closer, I could see the subtle disturbance, the almost imperceptible displacement in the air around its main hatch. It wasn't just bypassed, it was undone. She held a small evidence bag, its contents obscured by the condensation. She saw me and her expression tightened, a flash of something akin to pity crossing her features. "What are I doing here?" she asked, her voice flat. "The call, the method, it sounds familiar." She sighed, running a hand through her short, practical hair. "It is, too familiar, no struggle, no witnesses, just gone and this." She held up the evidence bag, my stomach clenched, the white orchid. His signature, a bloom of purity left in the wake of carefully orchestrated desecration. It was a cruel, beautiful taunt. "The owner," I said, my voice barely audible. "Did he mention anything else, anything unusual?" The colleague shook her head. "Just that the box was a gift from his grandmother. Said it was empty, held nothing but memories." Empty. He always stole something of symbolic value, not always monetary. He stole the essence of things. I stepped onto the deck of the Serafina, the polished teak cool beneath my touch. The main cabin was spotless, undisturbed. No scattered papers, no overturned furniture. The only sign of intrusion was the subtle, almost imperceptible scent of ozone, faint but distinct. He used a specific, silent method for breaching sophisticated security, a method I'd only ever seen him employ. My eyes scanned the pristine interior, searching for something, anything that felt out of place beyond the orchid. Then I saw it, tucked almost invisibly beneath a plush velvet cushion on a banquette. A small, intricately folded piece of heavy parchment. I knelt, my fingers brushing against the cool paper. It was not a note. It was a drawing, a stylized depiction of a labyrinth, its lines precise and unnervingly elegant. At its center, a single black dot. This wasn't just a heist. This was a message, a challenge. The labyrinth, the mark of the architect, the master of intricate designs and inescapable traps. It was the same symbol he had left behind on the last, unfinished case that had shattered my career and my life. I looked at the colleague, my gaze hard, unwavering. He's back. She stared at the drawing, her face pale. But it's been years. We thought he was gone, dead even. He was never gone, I corrected, the words tasting like ash. He was just waiting. This time I wouldn't fail. This time I would catch the ghost who had haunted my waking nightmares, even if it meant navigating his labyrinth myself. The city's breath, a damp exhale of exhaust and brine, clung to me as I moved through the skeletal streets. Each lamplight was a distant, mocking eye, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with my own unease. Sleep, a luxury I hadn't truly afforded myself in years, felt like a betrayal now. The specter of the past, freshly roused, clawed at the edges of my vision, making every mundane corner seem to hold a lurking threat. I clutched the worn leather journal, its pages filled with the cryptic scrawl of a forgotten horror, as if it were a shield against the creeping night. My destination was a whispered secret, a phantom address plucked from the digital ether where the latest heist's debris was still settling. The news reports, carefully sanitized for public consumption, mentioned only a discreet departure point. But the meticulous nature of the operation, the signature precision, screamed a different language to me. It spoke of a mind that delighted in misdirection, in the subtle mockery of authority. A mind I knew all too well. I found myself at the yacht marina after midnight. Wrong slip number, a desolate stretch where the rhythmic slap of water against hulls was the only sound. The air hung thick with the scent of diesel, salt, and decay, a pungent cocktail that filled my lungs and settled heavy in my chest. Rows of masts, like skeletal fingers, clawed at the Inkai sky, or perhaps the thief had already ensured no one would be watching. My eyes swept the numbered slips, each a silent promise of luxury and escape. He never did anything simply. There was always a layer beneath the surface, a deliberate obfuscation. I remembered the old case, the way he'd always left a trail that seemed obvious, yet led nowhere, until I looked for the absence of something, the deliberate wrongness. I bypassed 37, letting my gaze drift further down the dock, past the gleaming fiberglass and polished chrome. The boats here grew older, more neglected, their paint peeling, their covers flapping like tattered flags. And then I saw it. Slip 54. Not the grand yacht I'd expected from a crew capable of such an intricate theft, but a modest, almost forgotten cruiser, its hull stained with algae, its lines slack. It looked as if it hadn't moved in years. Yet something felt off. The mooring lines, though weathered, were taut. The canvas cover, while faded, was secured with a precision that contradicted the vessel's overall neglect. The moonlight, a sliver through the clouds, cast the cruiser in an eerie glow. I leaned closer, my breath misting in the cold air. There, just above the waterline where the hull met the dock, was a faint, almost invisible scratch. Not a gouge, but a shallow score, perhaps an inch long, thin as a spider silk. It was barely perceptible, easily dismissed as wear and tear. But my memory, a cruel and relentless archivist, conjured an image from years ago, a similar mark found on the edge of a display case after the jewels vanished. A signature, not a force but a finesse. A specific tool used with surgical precision to create just enough leverage without leaving obvious damage. My fingers traced the mark, a shiver snaking down my spine. The old case had been riddled with these subtle taunts, these almost invisible clues that only an obsessive eye would ever catch. He wanted to be seen, but only by those who truly understood his craft. He wanted to be chased. A faint, metallic scent, distinct from the usual marina odors, reached me. I knelt, my knees protesting, and peered under the edge of the canvas cover, lifting it just enough to cast a sliver of my phone's weak light into the cabin. The interior was sparse, stripped bare. But on the floorboards near what would have been a small galley, a few grains of sand lay scattered. Fine, white sand, not the coarse, gray grit of the city's waterfront. And then my gaze snagged on something else, half hidden beneath a loose plank. Not from a common gull or pigeon, but slender, iridescent with a distinct, almost metallic sheen. My mind reeled, the sand, the feather, a specific type of sand found only on a remote stretch of coastline miles from here, and the feather. He had a peculiar fascination with birds of prey, often leaving a single, perfect feather at his scenes, a macabre calling card, but never this kind. This was different. This was A hawk. A peregrine, swift, silent, deadly. This wasn't just a copycat, this was him. Evolved, refined. The wrong slip number, the subtle scratch, the hidden sand, the peculiar feather, it was all a carefully orchestrated message, a direct challenge delivered to me, the only one who might truly understand. He hadn't just returned to the city, he had returned for me. This wasn't just about solving a crime, this was personal. This was my penance, my reckoning. I could feel the pull, an irresistible current dragging me deeper. Every fiber of my being screamed for caution, for self-preservation, but the ghost of the past, the lives I'd failed to save, overshadowed all else. I had to follow this thread, no matter where it led, no matter the cost. My name, Cole, felt like a brand, searing me with a responsibility I couldn't ignore. My investigation had just begun. The city's breath, a damp exhale of exhaust and brine, clung to me as I moved through the skeletal streets. Sleep, a luxury I hadn't truly afforded myself in years, felt like a betrayal now. The chill of the night was a familiar companion, a sharp blade against my cheek as I navigated the winding paths towards the docks. My source, a grimy whisper in the digital ether, had pointed me towards a specific berth. A name, a number, scrawled on a fragment of a torn receipt, found near the second heist's perimeter. It was flimsy, barely a thread, but I had learned to follow the faintest currents in this murky world. I arrived at the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The rhythmic creak of ropes against hulls, the gentle slap of water, were the only sounds, a lullaby for the absent wealthy. My boots echoed softly on the slick planks as I passed row after row of gleaming white and polished wood, each yacht a silent sentinel of forgotten opulence. Slip B-17. That was the number on the receipt. I found the marker, a faded brass plate screwed into the dock. The space was empty. Not just empty of the boat I might have expected, but utterly vacant, swept clean, as if no vessel had docked there in months. Had I been played? There was this another ghost chase, a phantom scent leading me further into the fog of my own obsessions. Perhaps I'm just seeing what I want to see. I thought, the old self-doubt, a familiar, unwelcome guest. A pattern in the static, a face in the smoke. I knelt, running my gloved fingers over the rough wood of the dock, checking for fresh scuff marks, anything out of place. Nothing. The air itself felt undisturbed, carrying only the brine and diesel, no hint of recent activity, no lingering metallic tang, no faint trace of the specialized solvents I knew the phantom architect of these heists preferred. The wrong slip number. It gnawed at me. There was the receipt, a deliberate misdirection, meant to waste my time, or had I simply misinterpreted a fragment of data, grasping at straws? The distinction felt vital, yet elusive. Not a single siren, but a rising chorus, a frantic symphony of emergency vehicles converging from the city's heart. My head snapped up, my senses instantly sharpened, straining against the night. The sound was too widespread, too insistent to be a mere fender-bender. It was the frantic pulse of the city reacting to a fresh wound. My comms device, a relic from my days on the force, vibrated against my hip, its screen flashing with an incoming call. The caller ID was the detective, a name I hadn't seen flash across my screen in years, not since the last time I'd stood in the shadow of my own professional wreckage. My jaw tightened. He wouldn't be calling unless... I answered, my voice a low rasp. "Cole. Where the hell are you, Cole?" The detective's voice snapped, ragged with urgency and a barely contained fury. The sirens were louder on his end, a chaotic backdrop to his words. Another one, bigger this time, the city's screaming. What happened? I demanded, my gaze sweeping across the dark water, the silent yachts, a sudden sickening clarity cutting through the lingering frustration. It wasn't about this marina. It was a misdirection from this marina, a feint. The old city vault, he spat, his voice laced with disbelief. One beneath the financial district, supposedly impenetrable. Gone, clean like the others, but this is brazen. They hit the main repository of the city's private collection, priceless artifacts, bearer bonds. Everything. My breath hitched. The old city vault, a fortress designed in an era of steam and steel, a labyrinth of reinforced concrete and pressure plates, rumored to have survived a century of attempts. To breach that. It was an escalation I had feared, but hadn't quite allowed myself to believe. The audacity, the precision, a disgraced former detective asking questions, digging where he shouldn't be. I trying to make this harder for me, Cole. I'm trying to stop him, I countered, my voice low, dangerous. This isn't random, I know that. It's the same hand, the same twisted mind. Don't tell me what I know, he snarled. Just tell me why my name keeps coming up. I was at the warehouse. I was at the private gallery. Now this? Are I involved, Cole? Because if I am, I swear to God. I was at the yacht marina, I cut him off, the words tasting like ash. Following a lead, a dead end. Or so I thought, the wrong slip number. It wasn't wrong for the killer, it was wrong for me. a breadcrumb meant to lead me astray, to waste my precious hours while they executed their grander plan. A calculated move. There was a pause, heavy with suspicion and the distant wail of sirens. The yacht, marina, what possible connection? He's playing with us, I said, my voice gaining a terrible certainty. He's watching me, the receipt, the number. It was a distraction, a taunt. He knew I'd follow the pattern. He used it against me. That's a nice theory, Cole, the detective said, his voice laced with bitter sarcasm. But right now it just sounds like a convenient alibi. Stay put. Don't move. I'm sending a patrol unit to my location. We need to talk. It wasn't a mistake on my part or even a simple misdirection. It was a deliberate, cunning move, a carefully placed decoy to keep me occupied, to draw my focus away from the true target. He knew me. He anticipated my next move. The ghost from my past wasn't just mirroring his old methods. He was adapting, evolving, using my own investigative instincts against me. The game had just escalated, and I was clearly a pawn in his twisted chess match. My determination hardened, sharp as a honed blade. I wouldn't be played again, not by him, not by anyone. The receiver's cold, plastic still seemed to hum with the last echoes of the caller's deliberate misdirection. I felt it, a gnawing certainty that settled deep in my bones. I had been played. Not just outmaneuvered by a clever thief, but manipulated by a puppeteer who understood the mechanics of my mind, the very levers of my past failures. The city outside my window, a sprawling beast of concrete and restless light, seemed to mock my slow comprehension. This wasn't a simple smash and grab. This was a message woven into the fabric of the heists, a narrative I was meant to follow, yet always a step behind. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of ordered chaos, now felt like a cage. I moved to the worn armchair, the leather groaning a familiar protest, and dragged the whiteboard closer. Lines of hastily scrawled dates and locations marred its surface, each representing a breach, a theft. The art gallery, the secure vault, the tech CEO's penthouse. My initial assessment, shared with the investigating officer, had focused on the sheer value of the stolen goods, the audacious precision of the methods. But the caller's words, a whisper of a different agenda, had peeled back that superficial layer. I stared at the list, letting my gaze drift over the names of the victims, the catalog of their losses. The Golden Serpent, a painting of dubious provenance, a collection of rare, unregistered bearer bonds, encrypted data drives containing proprietary algorithms. On the surface, disparate. A connoisseur of illicit art, a financier with a penchant for untraceable assets, a titan of innovation guarding his digital empire. Greed. I'd told myself, pure, unadulterated greed driving these phantom thieves, but the pieces didn't quite fit. The effort involved in each operation far exceeded the inherent value of the loot, especially the data drives. Why risk so much for information that could be copied, replicated? Unless the data itself wasn't the primary target, but rather its absence from the original owner or its presence elsewhere. The serial killer. Their victims, too, had been disparate in profession, but united by a secret. A shared stain. A vast corporate malfeasance, a cover-up that had shattered lives and enriched the culpable. The art gallery owner, a known fence for offshore transactions. The financier, a key player in the shell companies that had funneled away the ill-gotten gains. The tech CEO, whose early investments had been mysteriously bolstered by funds linked to the very scandal that had ruined so many. It wasn't about what they owned now. The heists weren't just stealing valuables, they were stripping away the trophies of a past injustice. A methodical, almost surgical undoing. This wasn't simple larceny. This was retribution. The way they had always left a signature, a small, intricate carving of a broken compass, carefully placed to point nowhere. It was a detail I had kept locked away, a private torment. I grabbed my phone, fingers flying across the keypad. The phone rang twice, then a gruff voice answered. "It's Cole," I said, my voice low, strained. "I need you to dig, find me connections between the targets of these recent heists and the old Phoenix Project scandal. Anything. Lawyers, investors, silent partners, even the janitors if they signed an NDA. And specifically check for any assets they might have acquired or disposed of in the immediate aftermath of the scandal's public unraveling, say, 12 years back. And dangerous." "I know," I replied, my gaze falling on the newspaper clippings taped to the whiteboard, photos of the current victims overlaid with faded images of the past ones. "Just dig, and if you hear anything at all about a particular kind of, say, unique collection or piece of art that connects them, you call me, day or night." "You chasing ghosts again?" the informant asked, a hint of concern in his gravelly tone. "Something like that," I admitted, the lie tasting like ash. I wasn't chasing ghosts. Could be nothing, could be everything. A yacht, Slip B-17 said to look for a specific flag, but it felt off, a decoy. A yacht marina after midnight, that's prime territory for trouble, Cole. The informant warned, but I could hear the wheels already turning in his mind. He knew my desperation, understood the itch for truth that drove men like us. The city's distress outside seemed to amplify my own. The Phoenix Project scandal had been a complex web, and the killer's victims had been the primary architects of its cover-up. Now the heists targeted those who had benefited from that cover-up. It was an expansion, a new phase, or perhaps a different hand guiding the vengeance. The tip about the yacht, B-17, kept circling in my thoughts. It felt too easy, too precise for someone who had gone to such lengths to mislead me. A deliberate distraction. But what if the misdirection wasn't about the location itself, but the exact location? What if the wrong slip number was the key? I drove through the city's arteries, the hum of the engine a dull counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my thoughts. The yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number, pulsed in my mind like a neon sign. The air grew heavy with the scent of salt and diesel as I neared the waterfront. Moonlight slicked the dark water, turning the rows of moored vessels into silent, skeletal giants. Finding slip B-17 was easy enough. It was empty, a vacant berth where a sleek vessel should have been. A gust of wind whipped off the water, carrying with it the mournful clang of halyards against masts. The informant's voice echoed. I chasing ghosts again? Perhaps I was. But then my gaze drifted. A subtle shift in the play of light. Not B-17, but B-18. A smaller vessel, perhaps a fishing boat, bobbed gently. Its lines were older, its paint faded, almost invisible in the gloom. No specific flag, no obvious sign. Nothing to draw the eye. Tucked into a crevice where the hull met the deck, almost concealed by a loose rope, was a small, intricately carved piece of wood. It was a bird, but not just any bird. It was a sparrow, its wing broken. Caught in mid-flight. The signature, my breath hitched. The broken compass, a symbol of lost direction, had been replaced by a broken bird, a symbol of shattered freedom. A new twist, a new layer of pain. It wasn't the same, but it was undeniably connected. The ghost hadn't led me to an empty grave. It had left me a new, unsettling message, a direct challenge. The heists were not just about the Phoenix Project. They were personal. They were speaking to me directly. And the voice was eerily familiar, yet subtly changed, more refined, more dangerous. The city lights blurred into a distant, hazy glow behind me as I drove, the air growing thick with the brine and diesel fumes of the docks. The informant's voice, a gravelly whisper, still echoed in my ears. A yacht marina after midnight, that's prime territory for trouble, Cole. He wasn't wrong. Trouble was my shadow, my constant companion these days. I pulled into the expansive, hushed expanse of the yacht marina after midnight, the engine of my battered sedan a rude interruption in the symphony of creaking ropes and lapping water. Moonlight, a thin, silver film, slicked the polished decks of the vessels moored here, turning the rows of white hulls into ghostly sentinels. The slip number the informant had given me was wrong. It led to an empty berth, a gaping hole in the orderly procession of wealth. A deliberate misdirection, perhaps, or a test. My jaw tightened. He knew I wouldn't give up easily. The scent of salt and expensive wood filled my lungs. My gaze swept across the silent armada, searching for a sign, a flicker of something out of place. The informant had hinted at a specific model, a sleek, custom-built cruiser known for its discreet speed and a peculiar, almost iridescent hull. It wasn't at the designated slip. I walked the narrow planks, my footsteps muffled by the pervasive dampness. I passed a dozen, then two. The rhythm of my search, a slow, deliberate march against the impatience gnawing at my gut. Then, nestled near the very end of the furthest pier, I saw it. The unmistakable sheen of that particular hull, an oily rainbow in the faint light. The Heron, I remembered the informant calling it. No slip number displayed, of course, just as expected. A single light glowed faintly within the cabin, a warm, inviting beacon that felt utterly out of place in the predatory quiet. I climbed aboard, the deck swaying gently beneath my feet. The cabin door, a polished mahogany, was ajar. I like to keep late hours, I answered, my voice cutting through the stillness like a serrated edge. Seated at a small table cluttered with charts and an open laptop, flinched. He was older than I remembered, his face etched with deeper lines, but the eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, like chips of obsidian. This was the financier, the man who'd walked free from the periphery of the red veil case, his hands seemingly clean, his alibi ironclad. I'd always suspected him of more. He pushed back from the table, rising slowly, his movements fluid despite his age. Cole, a surprise. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and stale cigar smoke, and some ghosts refused to stay buried. "I'm no ghost," he scoffed, a thin smile playing on his lips. Merely a man enjoying his retirement. Retirement from what exactly? I asked, my gaze sweeping over the charts. They weren't pleasure cruise routes. They were detailed shipping lanes annotated with specific coordinates, some marked with small red crosses. These aren't exactly for a leisurely trip to the Bahamas. His smile vanished. That's none of your concern. It becomes my concern when the methods of a dead killer resurface. I pressed, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a low growl. The precision, the timing, the targets, it all screams Red Veil. And you, my friend, were a close acquaintance of the first victim and a beneficiary of his unfortunate demise. His eyes narrowed, losing their polished veneer. You're grasping at phantoms, Cole. That chapter is closed. Is it? Or did you just close the book on my involvement while the true story continued? I pointed to one of the red crosses on a chart. This coordinate. It's near the old industrial dock where the Jade Serpent heist took place. The one where they bypassed every security measure with surgical precision. He hesitated, a flicker of something akin to fear or perhaps irritation crossing his face. Coincidence. The city has many docks. Not many with that specific depth profile suitable for a certain type of submersible entry, I shot back. Remembering a detail from the old case files a peculiar method the killer had used to approach a target unseen. A method your former associate specialized in before he became a victim. His composure cracked. You know nothing of that man's true work, Cole, or mine. His hand slid beneath the table, his movements subtle, almost imperceptible, but I'd seen it before. I know enough, I responded, my eyes fixed on his hand. Enough to know the Red Veil killer didn't work alone. He had someone feeding him information, someone who understood logistics, access points, escape routes. You think you've unearthed some grand conspiracy. He pulled his hand back into view, holding not a weapon, but a small, intricate data chip no bigger than my thumbnail. This is all you'll find here, a fragment of a forgotten era, a dead end. My gaze flickered to the chip, then back to his eyes. A fragment or a lure? What is it? A ledger, old data, proof of nothing but my own legitimate, if somewhat unconventional, business dealings with the deceased. It implicates no one. He watched me, a smirk returning. But it will certainly implicate I if you're found rummaging through my private effects, trespassing, breaking, and entering. Your reputation is already a fragile thing, Cole. A sudden, sharp pain exploded in the back of my head. The world tilted, the cabin spinning violently. I gasped, stumbling forward, my vision blurring at the edges. I hadn't even heard him approach. Another figure, hulking and silent, stood behind me, a heavy metal wrench still glinting in his hand. I fought to stay upright, my hand scrabbling for the blade, but my limbs felt like lead. The scent of salt and diesel mixed with the metallic tang of my own blood. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat against my skull. The financier picked up the data chip, rolling it between his fingers. This little trinket, he added, his voice now devoid of its cultured smoothness, is a key, not to a ledger but to a deeper understanding of our operations, and you, my dear Cole, are not invited. The hulking figure moved again, a blur of motion. I felt a shove, a powerful impact against my chest. My feet left the deck. The shock of the icy embrace stole my breath. The light in the cabin became a distant, mocking star. I broke the surface, gasping, sputtering, my head screaming in protest. The boat was already pulling away, its powerful engines a low thrum that vibrated through the water. The financier stood on the stern, a silhouette against the distant city glow, the data chip no doubt safely in his pocket. He hadn't just gotten away, he'd taken a piece of the puzzle with him, a piece he'd almost let me see. The setback was complete. I was wet, bruised, and no closer to answers. In fact, I was further away, having merely confirmed that my instincts were right, but paid a steep price for it. He wasn't just an associate, he was an active participant, and he was still pulling strings. And for a moment, just a fleeting, desperate moment, I doubted myself. Was I truly chasing a phantom, dragging myself through the mire for a ghost that should stay buried? No. The cold water, the pain, the escaping boat, they were all too real. This was no phantom. This was a war, and I had just lost the first skirmish. My lungs burned, a desperate fire against the freezing assault. The current, unseen but felt, tugged at my limbs, disorienting me in the Inkai blackness. Panic, a cold, sharp claw, tried to rake its way into my thoughts, but I fought it back, an old reflex kicking in. Breathe! I thrashed, aiming for the surface, my vision a blur of distorted light from the distant dock lamps. My head broke the surface with a gasp, air tearing into my throat, tasting of salt and diesel. The yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The words echoed, a phantom whisper in the chaotic churn of my mind, a chilling counterpoint to the rush of the water. My fingers scraped against slick barnacles, finding purchase on the cold, slime-coated metal ladder of a nearby vessel. My ribs ached where the hulking figure had struck me, a dull throb deepening with every breath. I coughed, spitting out brackish water, my eyes, still stinging, scanning the empty stretch of pontoons. Nothing. My gaze fell to the faded white numbers painted on the edge of the pontoon, slip 17. I blinked, water dripping into my eyes, blurring the digits. No, this wasn't right. I had been given slip 7, a clear, concise instruction. This wasn't a random attack, a simple mugging gone wrong. This was a message. A deliberate misdirection, but why? My mind raced, trying to find the connection, the subtle thread woven into this seemingly innocuous detail. And then I saw it. A stylized, twisted knot, barely visible beneath a patch of dried algae close to the waterline. My breath hitched, caught in my throat like a shard of ice. The old case. The serial killer, the one I'd failed to catch, had left that same mark. Not at every scene, but at the periphery, on an abandoned shed near one victim, on a forgotten tool at another. I had dismissed them as unrelated, as random vandalism, a desperate attempt by local youths to claim a macabre connection. A mistake, a terrible, damning oversight. Now it was here at the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number, staring back at me like a ghost risen from the depths of my professional failures. The knot wasn't just a signature, it was a taunt. It told me this wasn't just a copycat, a mimicry of past horrors. This was someone who knew the intricacies of the original investigation, someone who knew my failures, the blind spots in my vision. The wrong slip number wasn't an accident. It was a precise, cruel joke aimed directly at me. Slip 17, where I now stood, was where that victim's boat had been docked. Not the body, but the boat itself, a pristine vessel that had seemed disconnected from the grim discovery. The difference a decade ago had seemed irrelevant, a mere detail lost in the overwhelming tide of grief and horror. Now it screamed. A name, a face began to coalesce in the murky depths of my memory, rising like debris from a sunken wreck. Not the killer I'd pursued, the one who eventually vanished, leaving a trail of unanswered questions, but someone else. Someone connected to that first victim. The victim's brother. He'd been a dock worker, familiar with the intricate waterways, the hidden nooks and crannies of the marina, the silent language of the tides. He'd always believed I'd failed, that the true story of his brother's demise had been buried, lost in the noise of a botched investigation. He'd watched me, I realized now, with an intensity I dismissed as simple sorrow. An intensity that now felt like a simmering, decade-long resentment. Could it be him? After all these years, the quiet dock worker, driven by a decade of festering grief and a thirst for a justice he felt I had denied him. My mind rebelled against the notion. It was too neat, too convenient, a narrative too perfectly crafted to fit the ragged edges of my past. Had I truly missed something so fundamental, so obvious, that it had lain dormant, waiting to erupt? The self-doubt, a familiar, corrosive acid, began to eat at the edges of my certainty. My failure had not just been in catching the killer, but in understanding the true scope of the tragedy, the ripple effects it had caused. And now those ripples had become a tidal wave, crashing down on me with the force of a forgotten nightmare. The knot, the slip numbers, the precision of the attack, it was all a carefully orchestrated symphony of vengeance. He wasn't just mirroring the past. He was correcting it, twisting it, using it to settle an old score, to expose the truth he believed I had overlooked. And I was the centerpiece of his grim tableau. He knew I was pursuing him. He had lured me here, to this exact spot, to this yacht marina after midnight. Wrong slip number, not just to attack me, but to remind me of my past mistakes, to show me he was always watching, always a step ahead. The game had just become deadly personal. I was no longer just an investigator. I was a target, drawn into a web spun from my own failures, a pawn in a meticulously planned retribution that stretched back years, waiting for the perfect moment to unravel my world. Breathe! I thrashed, aiming for the faint, shimmering line of light that promised the surface, a distant hope in the crushing chill. Each kick was a desperate prayer, each stroke a battle against the water's possessive embrace. My muscles screamed, a chorus of protest, but I ignored them, focusing solely on the rise and fall of my own desperate struggle. Then a sudden solidity. My hand scraped against rough, algae-slicked wood. A dock, thank the gods. I clawed, finding purchase, dragging my heavy, waterlogged form from the relentless grip of the channel. I lay there for a moment, gasping, tasting brine and something metallic on my tongue, the world swaying around me. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up, my clothes heavy and clinging. Water streamed from my jacket, pooling on the dock. The air hummed with the distant thrum of the city, punctuated by the gentle creak of ropes against cleats and the soft lap of water against hulls. I was at the yacht marina after midnight, but the precise location felt wrong. but the numbers painted on the pilings around me read 18, then 19. I was at the wrong slip number. A wave of frustration, bitter as the salt in my mouth, washed over me. All that struggle, all that risk for a dead end, or was it? My gaze swept across the array of moored vessels, but one, a sleek cruiser at slip 18, had a faint, almost imperceptible glow emanating from its cabin. My eyes narrowed. That wasn't right. No one left lights on at this hour, not without a reason. And the name etched on its stern, the Serenity, sent a jolt through me. I knew that name. It belonged to the older brother of Alina Vance, the second victim from my old case. A man I'd spoken to countless times, whose grief I'd witnessed firsthand. Why here? Why his boat? The gangplank was down, an open invitation. This was too easy, too deliberate. The perpetrator had left a door ajar, not just for entry, but for discovery, a trap or a message. My hand instinctively went to the empty holster at my hip. My weapon was at the bottom of the channel, a grim offering to the depths. I stepped onto the polished deck, the wood cool beneath my feet. The faint light inside beckoned. A shiver traced its way up my spine. My instincts screamed danger, but something else, a desperate need for answers, pushed me forward. I pushed it open slowly, bracing myself. The cabin was tidy, almost pristine, but something lay on the small, varnished table in the center. It was a photograph, old and faded, of a young girl with wide, innocent eyes, holding a small, intricately carved wooden bird. Alina. And resting beside the photograph, a fresh carving, identical to the one in the picture, but new, the wood still smelling faintly of cedar. It was perfect, exquisite in its detail, a miniature marvel of wings and feathers. My breath hitched. This was the bird Alina had carved with her father before he passed. The one her brother had told me about, how she always carried it, how it had never been found with her body. My mind raced, connecting the impossible dots. The perpetrator hadn't just left a clue, they had recreated a lost memento, then planted it here on her brother's boat, at the wrong slip number I was supposed to investigate. This wasn't just about the heists anymore. This was a direct, calculated taunt, a cruel echo of my greatest failure. He wants me to remember, I muttered, my voice hoarse. He wants me to relive it. A sudden sound from the deck above, a soft thud. My head snapped up. I hadn't been alone. My muscles tensed, every nerve ending screaming. I ducked low, pressing myself against the galley counter, my eyes scanning the cabin for anything I could use as a weapon. A heavy ceramic mug, a dull butter knife. Pathetic. Footsteps, light but deliberate, moved across the main deck above. They weren't hurried, not panicked. They were confident, almost casual. He knew I was here. He wanted me to be here. This was his stage, and I was the captive audience. I heard the distinct click of a camera shutter from above, followed by a low, almost inaudible chuckle. The sound was like sandpaper on raw nerves. He wasn't just taunting me, he was documenting my despair. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just mirroring the past, he was actively weaving me into his current narrative. My presence, my reactions were part of his design. If he wanted me to find this, why the wrong slip number? Why not just leave it where I was supposed to be? Unless the wrong slip number was a clue in itself, a deviation from the expected path meant to highlight his control, his ability to manipulate even my investigative methods. The footsteps retreated, fading into the night. I waited, straining my ears, until the marina was once again swallowed by its usual sounds of lapping water and creaking wood. He was gone. I stood, my gaze fixed on the photograph and the carved bird. The perpetrator was no longer a phantom. He was a puppeteer pulling strings connected directly to my deepest wounds. My failure to catch him years ago had not only allowed him to return, but had now made me the focal point of his twisted game. And in this game, the stakes weren't just the lives of strangers, but the ghosts of my past and perhaps the very few connections I still held. I had doubted myself before, questioned my judgment, my ability to see the truth. But now, seeing Alina's face, knowing he had recreated her lost treasure just to rub it in, there was no room for doubt, only a burning, desperate resolve. He had gone too far, he had targeted me. The ceramic mug felt cold and rough in my grip, a poor substitute for the weight of a service revolver. My breath hitched, a thin rasp in the otherwise silent galley. The thud from above had been too deliberate, too heavy for a stray rope, too resonant for a flapping sail. It was a sound of impact, of something dropped or someone landing. I edged towards the companionway steps, each muscle coiled, every sense straining against the thick canvas of the night. The scent of salt and diesel was heavy, but beneath it, a faint metallic tang like old coins pricked at my nostrils. My gaze swept the narrow space, searching for shadows that didn't belong, for the glint of an eye or the ripple of cloth. Nothing. The cabin remained a still life of varnished wood and muted cushions. Slowly, carefully, I ascended, my bare feet finding purchase on the cool, polished steps. The air on deck was sharper, cooler, carrying the distant murmur of the city. The mast stood sentinel, its rigging a skeletal outline against the faint glow of the distant city. The canvas covers were taut, undisturbed. The hatches were latched, the lines coiled neatly. No broken glass, no forced entry, no sign of a struggle or even a presence. Had I imagined it, there was the weariness finally blurring the edges of my perception. There was I chasing ghosts again, projecting the shadow of the old killer onto every creak and groan of the night. My hand tightened on the mug, the ceramic edge biting into my palm. Then my gaze snagged on something, not an obvious disturbance but a subtle anomaly. On the pristine, non-skid surface near the stern, a faint, almost microscopic scuff mark. It wasn't the kind of mark a shoe would leave, nor a dropped tool. It was elongated, shallow, as if something smooth and heavy had been dragged, then lifted, and beside it, partially obscured by the shadow of a stanchion, a small, dark object. I knelt, my knees protesting the sudden movement. It was too precise, too stylized to be accidental debris, and it was utterly out of place on the deck of a yacht. This wasn't a random trespasser. This was a calling card. My mind raced, connecting the meticulous nature of the heists, the almost theatrical precision, to this tiny, deliberate clue. The perpetrator wasn't just stealing. They were performing, leaving breadcrumbs, taunting. And they knew I was here at the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number. They had been watching me. The thud wasn't an accident. It was a signal, a deliberate sound meant to draw my attention, to confirm their presence without revealing themselves. It was personal. The perpetrator wasn't just mirroring the old killer's methods. They were playing my game, using my past against me. They wanted me to chase them. And in that moment, a grim resolve hardened within me. If they wanted a chase, I would give them one. But this time, I would be the hunter, not the hunted. I stood, the metal disc clutched in my hand, its cool surface a tiny anchor in the swirling storm of my thoughts. The perpetrator wanted to lead me, but where? And why this specific yacht at this specific incorrect slip? It wasn't about the boat itself. It was about the location, a place of vulnerability, a place where I was exposed. They were testing me, measuring my reactions. My eyes swept the marina, the rows of silent vessels bobbing gently, their masts swaying like skeletal fingers against the bruised sky. The perpetrator had observed me, studied my habits, even anticipated my presence here. This wasn't a random act. It was a calculated move in a larger game, and the next move was mine. I needed to set a stage to create an irresistible lure. The perpetrator thrived on precision, on the illusion of control. I would give them that illusion. I would create a scenario so perfectly aligned with their known patterns, so seemingly effortless that they wouldn't be able to resist. My gaze settled on the adjacent slip, where a sleek, modern cruiser sat, its hull gleaming even in the dim light. It was a vessel known for its advanced navigation systems, its high-tech communication suite, precisely the kind of sophisticated equipment the perpetrator had been targeting in their previous heists. This was it. The bait. I spent the next hour moving with a quiet urgency, my movements fluid and practiced despite the throbbing ache in my temples. I disabled the visible alarm sensors on the cruiser's stern, not fully, but enough to register as a false sense of security, a minor oversight that the perpetrator would undoubtedly detect and exploit. I loosened a particular hatch cover, making it appear as if a careless technician had left it unsecured. I even left a small, innocuous-looking toolkit near the access panel for the main navigation system, a subtle invitation to the technically inclined. I was speaking their language, mimicking their precision, creating a tableau of opportunity. I was leaving a door ajar, not just for entry, but for their ego. They would see it as a flaw in my vigilance, a sign of my desperation, a perfect opening for their next grand performance. My trap, however, wasn't about catching them in the act of theft. It was about catching them entering. I settled in, the rough wood of the shack digging into my back, the salty tang of the air filling my lungs. The metal disc, the perpetrator's calling card, remained clutched in my hand, a talisman against the encroaching anxiety. This was a gamble, a desperate high-stakes bluff. If I was wrong, if I had misread their intentions, I would have merely cleared the path for another successful heist, another failure to add to my already burdened conscience. But if I was right, if they truly sought to engage me to play this twisted game, then they would come. They would see the opening, the apparent vulnerability, and they would step onto my stage. The world outside the shack was a canvas of deepening blues and grays, the first hints of false dawn painting the horizon. The marina was silent, save for the gentle lapping of water against hulls. My eyes, gritty and burning, remained fixed on the cruiser. The tension was a physical knot in my chest, tightening with each passing minute. I had laid the trap. Now I waited for the predator to come. It was a sound of impact, a declaration in the echoing quiet of the boat, specifically on the deck directly over my head. My grip tightened around the mug, the cheap porcelain suddenly fragile. Every nerve in my body tightened, a taut wire humming with premonition. This was it. The culmination of phantom trails and mirroring shadows, all leading to this solitary vessel, docked stubbornly at the yacht marina after midnight wrong slip number. A deliberate misdirection, perhaps, or a calculated trap. I edged towards the narrow companionway, each step a deliberate suppression of creaking wood. Moonlight, fractured by the mast and rigging, painted stark geometric shapes across the varnished steps. At the top, the deck stretched out, a vast open stage under the watchful eye of a bruised indigo sky. The air, sharpened by the sea, bit at my exposed skin. Nothing, only the rhythmic slap of water against the hull and the distant, almost imperceptible groan of another boat's mooring lines. Then a flicker, not a movement but a disruption in the uniform gloom of the cabin hatch. Waiting. I knew you'd come. Cole, a voice drifted, low and smooth like silk dragged over stone. My spine stiffened. The mug felt like a feather. You brought me here, I stated, the words tasting like rust in my mouth, to draw me out. A tapestry woven just for I, Cole, not the serial killer from years ago, but someone else entirely. Someone who knew the killer, knew their methods intimately. A disciple, a successor. Who are you? I demanded, my voice rougher than I intended, reflecting what I chose to ignore. They gestured to the surrounding marina, to the countless other yachts bobbing silently. This particular slip number, it holds a certain resonance, doesn't it? The place where the first victim of my failure was found. Not the body, no, the old case, the marina. That small, innocuous detail about a lost locket recovered days later by a dockhand, miles from where the body was eventually found. A locket I'd dismissed as unrelated. Wait, that doesn't add up. The locket was found near this slip, not the one I remembered. My memory, clouded by years of regret, had shifted the details. My stomach churned. You knew I'd remember the location, but perhaps not the exact coordinates, they taunted, their eyes gleaming. A fitting stage for your grand failure, wouldn't you say? My grip on the mug tightened, the cheap ceramic threatening to crack. My gaze flickered, searching for an advantage, anything. The perpetrator held something in their hand, a glint of polished metal. A knife, not a standard blade, something with a wicked serrated edge like a bone saw scaled down. You think you can bait me, play with me? I snarled, pushing past the doubt that gnawed at my confidence. I'm not the same man you remember. No, you're worse, they countered, taking a step forward. You're broken, and a broken man is a predictable man. The air crackled, the perpetrator lunged, a blur of motion. I reacted on instinct, swinging the mug like a club. It connected with a sickening crack against their forearm, shattering into a dozen shards, sending a jolt of pain up my arm. The perpetrator hissed, but their momentum didn't falter. The knife arced, a silver blur aiming for my chest. A searing pain bloomed, hot and immediate. I stumbled back, my hand flying to the wound, sticky warmth blooming beneath my fingers. The taste of salt and copper filled my mouth. Foolish Cole, they breathed, advancing, the knife now held low, ready to thrust. Still thinking with brute force, not strategy. My mind raced, the pain a sharp spur. Strategy, this wasn't just a fight, it was a performance, a lesson. They wanted me to see something, to understand something. The overlooked details, the locket, the slip number. You're not the killer, I gasped, clutching my side, but you're connected. You knew them. Redemption, but some debts can never be paid. They lunged again, this time with a swift, practiced movement, a thrust aimed at my gut. My years on the street, the countless brawls and desperate struggles kicked in. I sidestepped, grabbing their wrist, twisting with all my might. The serrated blade bit into the varnished deck as they lost their footing, a harsh scrape of metal on wood. We grappled, a desperate dance of muscle and bone on the rocking deck. The yacht groaned beneath us, the ropes creaking in protest. My injured side screamed with every movement, but adrenaline surged, a bitter, potent elixir. I felt the cold metal of the knife against my palm, trying to wrench it free, but their grip was iron. Their face, close now, was contorted in a mask of savage determination. You let them down, Cole, they hissed, their voice raw with accusation, and you'll let them down again. Then, with a sudden, violent twist, they broke free, sending me sprawling against the cabin wall. My head hit the hard wood with a sickening thud, stars exploding behind my eyes. For a moment the world spun, the moon and stars blurring into a chaotic swirl. The perpetrator stood over me, the glint of the knife held high, silhouetted against the vast, indifferent night sky. The climax, my redemption or my final failure. The glint was of polished steel, long and thin, catching the moon's fractured light through the cabin window. A filleting knife, I thought with a grim clarity, its edge keen enough to slice through bone. My head throbbed, a drumbeat against the splintered wood, but the fog of impact began to recede, replaced by a desperate burning resolve. I lay still, feigning the full embrace of unconsciousness, my breath shallow, my eyes barely slits. The perpetrator stood over me, a silhouette against the faint glow of the yacht marina after midnight wrong slip number beyond the porthole. I could hear the gentle lapping of water against the hull, a deceptive lullaby in this vessel of impending dread. A low chuckle rumbled from above, a sound that twisted the knot in my gut. So the great Cole finally falls. The voice began a familiar cadence, yet distorted by an unsettling glee. It's always the same, isn't it? The righteous fall, the forgotten rise. My mind raced, scrambling for purchase. The voice, it was deeper now, coarser than I remembered, but the underlying timbre. It was a ghost from my past, a specter I'd dismissed as insignificant. My eyes flickered, catching the subtle shift of moonlight on their face as they leaned closer. The shadow of a cap pulled low, still obscured features, but the tilt of the head, the set of the shoulders. You always looked for the grand design, Cole. The voice continued, laced with a bitter amusement. The mastermind, the genius, but sometimes the monster is simply born from neglect, from being overlooked, from a system that fails to see the rot beneath the surface. My heart, though bruised, hammered out a rhythm of recognition. This wasn't just about the heists. This was personal. This was about me. The pieces began to coalesce, sharp and painful. The methods mirroring the old killer, the precision, the taunting notes. It wasn't a copycat. It was an evolution. You left a trail of wreckage, Cole. They hissed, the knife dipping slightly, its tip hovering inches from my chest. A family shattered, a life unavenged. While you chased shadows, the real killer walked free, and those of us left behind. We learned. We adapted. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement that felt like an eternity, they reached up and pulled back the cap, revealing a face etched with a history I knew too well. Not the face of a stranger, but of the son of one of the victims from my failed case years ago. I see Cole. While I mourned my failure, I studied his work, the original killer. I saw the artistry in his depravity, the meticulous planning I somehow missed, and when I saw the chance, I picked up where he left off. Not for his glory, but for my own, for my mother. The heists. The money. I forced out, trying to buy time to understand the full, twisted logic. A means to an end, they scoffed, gesturing vaguely towards the cabin door, as if the entire marina was part of their elaborate stage. To fund my grander design, to show the world what happens when justice is starved, when the protectors falter, and to draw you back, Cole. I could feel the cold metal, the phantom sting of its edge. My mind, despite the throbbing pain, was a whirlwind of calculations. Why? To evade, to confuse, or to make a statement. You think you've won? I replied, my voice gaining strength despite the tremor. Think this makes you an avenger, but you're just another monster wearing a dead man's skin. The smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of rage. Don't you dare compare me to him. He was an animal. I am a surgeon. I carve out the rot that you nurtured. This was it, the moment of truth. My eyes, still partially veiled, scanned the small cabin. A small, heavy fishing tackle box lay near my outstretched hand, just out of reach, if I could just. You always underestimate. Cole, they muttered, distracted by their own fervor, the knife pressing harder. You underestimate the pain you leave behind. And you underestimate the resilience of the living. I retorted. With a sudden, explosive burst of adrenaline, I lashed out with my foot, kicking upward with all my remaining strength. It wasn't aimed to connect with their body, but to knock the knife from their hand. My foot connected with their forearm, jarring them. The filleting knife clattered against the wooden floor, skittering under a bunk. For a split second, surprise widened their eyes. It was all I needed. I rolled, scrambling on hands and knees towards the tackle box, my head screaming in protest. They recovered quickly, lunging for me. I grabbed the heavy box, its contents rattling, and swung it blindly. The impact was dull, sickening against their head. They stumbled back, a gasp escaping their lips, giving me precious seconds. I pushed myself up, my legs wobbly, but my resolve hardening. The cabin door was a few feet away. I lunged for it, throwing my weight against the latch. It groaned, then gave way. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and cleansing. The marina was quiet, save for the gentle rocking of boats. I could hear them recovering behind me, a choked grunt. You won't escape, Cole, they snarled from the cabin's threshold. I didn't try to run far. Instead, I yelled, my voice raw and hoarse. He's here, the killer. I ducked, feeling the wind of its passage as it smashed against the railing of the adjacent boat. Footsteps heavy and urgent thumped closer. Cole, we got a ping on my tracker. What's my status? It was the voice of a colleague, sharp with concern. My assailant froze, their head whipping towards the approaching light. Their plan, meticulously crafted, was unraveling. With a frustrated growl, they turned, scrambling towards the stern of the yacht, clearly intending to jump into the water. "Don't let them get away!" I yelled, pointing. The colleague, followed by 2 other uniformed officers, sprinted forward, their flashlights converging on the fleeing figure. There was a splash, a struggle, and then the shouts of command. They had them. I leaned against the railing, sucking in deep gulps of the salty air, my body trembling not just from the pain, but from the raw aftermath of the confrontation. The case was closed. My colleague reached me, his face a mixture of relief and stern disapproval. "Cole, what in God's name did I get myself into?" I looked at the struggling figure, now handcuffed and being led away. The son of a victim, a ghost I had failed to acknowledge. The truth, when it finally emerged, was often simpler, more tragically human than any elaborate conspiracy. It wasn't about a grand, unseen network. It was about the insidious rot left behind by the unaddressed grief and anger of one man. My head still pounded, but the stars had settled. But this time I had seen it through. This time I had caught the monster, and in the quiet hum of the marina under the indifferent gaze of the moon, I felt a burden lift, a faint echo of redemption. The demons weren't gone, not entirely, but they were, for now, quieted, and for the first time in years I could breathe.